The temptation of the inexplicable outlier. It's like, golly, if I could just get rid of this one data point.
Oh, here's a great, yeah, let's just do some rapid fire opinion, not even rapid fire, outliers.
I include everything.
Actually, you know what? Out of laziness, it's like, whatever, include it.
Yeah.
I used
I don't
to
know how
be
you
really,
feel, Matthew.
Well, it's difficult because the nature of those outliers, it's very difficult to create an a priori definition of what constitutes an outlier and what conditions one could set up a priori for eliminating those aberrant data points. And so it's very tough. Most outliers are detected in a post hoc fashion. And one goes back to the adage, it's the exception that proves the rule. And so this is maybe one thing that the physical sciences could borrow from the social sciences. We never expect that there won't be outliers. We know there are really weird people out there. The notion that there would be weird proteins or weird electrons, or that there would be some of this non-rule based behavior amongst proteins, electrons.
That's exactly what I view it as.
But
there is no weird proteins,
weird participants who will give you the exact opposite responses just to be obstinate, to have this sort of oppositional defiant personality trait and just give you the opposite. It's something that we've had to come to grips with, perhaps a little bit more. It gets bundled up with measurement error, that our outliers can be the result of having someone completely misinterpret the questions on a survey, or to be viewing them through a very different lens than what's anticipated, or to just simply be quirky and obstinate. So for me, when I'm looking at a data set and there are some clear outliers, one has to be a little bit of a detective and see what can you figure out by looking at some of the demographic features of that one particular data point, or a very small 2 or 3 data points that fall far outside the pattern exhibited by the others. What can we tell based on the measures that we've collected to see if there is a general rule that can be created? And if that's something that is interpretable and makes sense, that, we had language in our survey that, inadvertently was, viewed as hostile by a small group of participants. It wasn't intended on our part and ended up being, a microaggression against that group, and they gave us weird data. We figured that out. We see where that's coming from. Then, it's part of the storytelling that, we take these 3 data points out because they are very different from the pattern. But we can't really know that that's the case without collecting another data set and, either manipulating those questions to remove that source of potential problem, remove the microaggressions from the measures, and see if the outlier problem goes away when we sample from that same, demographic group, or, if we say, okay, we're going to try and enhance this, which probably is not ethical. Or
enhance meaning like increase the amount of responses that would fit within those outliers.
Or, hey, let's sample from this group more heavily and see the different pattern that is exhibited, suggesting that, our sample was a finite mixture of 2 different populations. Population of folks who would operate in one way with a positive relation with these variables, and then another population for discernible reasons that operates in a different, with a negative relation between a pair of constructs. And if we can make sense and interpret the reasoning behind and construct, additional hypotheses about why those two different populations would have different reactions, we've probably uncovered something really exciting and cool. We can also just divide up our sample into the folks who have a positive relation and the folks who have a negative relation, and maybe another population where folks have clearly no relation, and all of a sudden we'll have a great predictive model, except all we've done is to create groups that are, posterior creations. They're created post hoc, and the only common feature they have is that, in a random distribution, bivariate distribution, they fell in a certain region. So if we can't interpret why, what's the basis of group membership, then it doesn't really do us much good.
So then your point was you're naturally going to find in a population subjects or outcomes that are at either end of the spectrum. And so you should include those in your analysis. I guess I might rebuttal in the sense that, like, if you only have 10 samples and sample 10 is wildly off the charts, like, do you really have, does that really feel like it's one of those that are in the 97th percentile? If you know your measurement error, it's not measurement error, no one made a mistake. And let's take pigs, for example, and one is like 3 times heavier than all the rest. To me, it's like, that's an abnormal case. We should remove that one. Well, but if I had 100 or 200 or 1,000, maybe this is the point of, if it's, it's an outlier, but is it influential on your data set?
Yeah, those are two different issues.
Yeah. If it's influential, then I think, getting back to Matthew's point, you should look at that one specific example. Hey, what is going on with this specific pig that caused the weight to be so much more heavy? Maybe there was an error on the person running the trial for that specific pig, and perhaps there is.
Let's just, though, brainstorm, like, it's not a measurement error, like, that's legit what its weight was, and it wasn't through a fault of experimentation.
Then I keep it in there. I mean, it's one sample, right? If it's just one out of, and the other nine follows an estimated mean closer to the true population, then why does it matter?
But I would say that that's going to change your mean, and maybe you would say, screw it, let's solve this problem by using median. Let's pretend that's not an option. It would artificially inflate the averages, and it's like,
it will artificially inflate. It will be minute though, if it's just one, right?
Well, it depends on what the total sample size is. We know the mean is very susceptible to the influence of outliers.
We're all susceptible to Jeff Bezos's income.
That's a whole nother podcast.
Yeah, well, table that for some other thing, for some other time.
I just can't say anything because I won't shut up for the next 6 hours.
That's the next topic.
Yeah, we know the mean is susceptible to outliers. And so if what we are, doing, if we're comparing two different conditions to try and find out which one results in hogs that are heavier, then, whether the outlier is in, one nutritional condition or the other nutritional condition, it could have so much influence that whichever group it's in looks to be the best group, even though taking that one case out would completely change the discussion. So we could say, oh, there is a pig that has been subject to alien abduction, and there's dark matter placed inside the pig that makes it, 10 times.
Oh my gosh.
And so it's not anything about the nutrition.
Yeah.
It's the fact that one of the pigs was subject to an alien, abduction
with dark matter injected into it.
Yeah.
Then you take it out.
Dark matter probe and left it up there.
Yeah. Conduct a whole different experiment with dark matter probes.
You put on it's just crushing everywhere it goes. Scales off the charts.
This needs to go on the list of places I did not think this conversation was going to go.
Dark matter probe. What are we probing it?
This isn't outside the realm at all of my research. I mean, should we talk about fecal collections and probing for those?
Oh man.
Okay, follow up though to the outlier, and because these are things we would debate in my old lab all the time. Okay, so it's an outlier for body weight. Everything else looks normal. Do we include it for one? Do we exclude it for that one measure, or do we, subject wise deletion or observation wise deletion? What I did in papers is observation wise deletion. Maybe I would or wouldn't do it, but again, that way. No, I think that is fair, right? You could be an outlier in some ways and totally normal in other ways. Doesn't mean you need to be omitted from the entire data set. And of course, there was bias for us because we're like, well, we don't want to omit too many because then we have a really small sample size.
No, and just omit that when you're talking about we can realistically get our hands on 10 animals is very different from we'll just put another survey on Amazon MTurk and we'll get another 500 responses.
Yeah,
that is entirely different question when the protocol is very in-depth and very time intensive and resource intensive per experimental unit. It may not be an option to say, let's throw this one data point away and then throw all the other data points for that particular animal, that particular case away. That case-wise deletion of data is can be a huge detriment to the overall power of the study.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So earlier on when I was in grad school, I was very staunch, like, okay, if it's outside, I either picked 2 or 3 studentized residuals. I'd have to go look at the manuscript, whatever. I'd pick a number. I'd say if it's out that, get rid of it. And I did it on a measure specific, so not a whole subject. But the mistake was I was just overwriting the data set and omitting that. And then I was, your face. I learned in the code before publishing that that's what was happening. So, I stopped doing that. But I handed the code off and they're like, every time I run this, it keeps finding new outliers and getting rid of them. And now I have like 4 subjects. I think that's a case where it's obvious. So, okay, you removed an outlier. Do you now look for more outliers, and do you remove those too? In some distributions, if it's really skewed, you're just going to keep finding new ones and new ones. If it's really normal, I assume you probably won't find another outlier. Did you guys encounter that in your research, and how do you deal with that?
I have not seen a data set within the last 10 years that had such a huge outlier that it was just immediately obvious and that something had to be done. It's not a common occurrence.
Yeah, same for us over here. Like, we don't get an outlier that is so out there that let's eliminate it just outright. Like, most of the time, it just groups up really nicely.
That's nice for you guys. Yeah. Well, Vin, we're working on one right now, right? So we've got some organ weights of animals, and one of them is like, this doesn't even make sense. It's just so
out there.
Maybe something about me. I attract outliers in my data sets. I'm the measurement error piece part of this.
Go.
Because I felt like when I was learning stats, I had to throw everything out because I was like, well, every assumption is violated. It's not normal. I have outliers. Nothing. I was like, I felt like I could barely find a normal distribution to save my life. And everything had to be non-normal or non-parametric or whatever. I think I'm just rambling now. But we frequently encountered, I guess, just statistical outliers. We don't know if they're necessarily biologically outliers. But
well, and when you are doing small sample size research, I think you are more, susceptible to finding some of those extreme cases. And, if you were, not working with 10 animals, but somehow resources became truly unlimited and you were working with, 200, 300 animals, some of those data points in between the outlier and, the others could be filled in, and then it suddenly doesn't look like an outlier.
Yeah.
And I think that brings us back to one of the concepts that Vin raised, which is it an influential outlier or not? Because if you're looking at the relation between two characteristics and the case is extremely high on both variables that are positively related, then removing it won't have a huge influence on the size of your regression slope or the size of the correlation coefficient that you've calculated. Where it has a gigantic influence is where it's extremely high on one variable and extremely low on the other, when there is a generally positive relation between the two, and where it is attenuating the correlation for the full sample quite strongly, and to the point where it could actually generate a negative correlation, but deleting that one case makes it, instead of a weak negative, a strong positive association. And then it becomes a really crucial issue with how we handle that influential outlier, because we reach the opposite set of conclusions with and without the data point.
Do you then take like a procedure before you even analyze it to say, all right, we're going to look at influential points. If they meet these criteria, we're going to remove them. Do you, peek under the hood, try to figure out why it was influential? I can see arguments for both, right? Peek under the hood, is this legitimate observation? Versus, no, just this is your procedure. Just do that, report it. It is what it is.
I think as long as you're really clear about what you did and why you did it, ultimately, it falls on your peers to evaluate those decisions. And, the reviewers may come back. It's yet another reason why we don't overwrite our data set. So that we can, here's the analysis with the outlier included, here's the analysis with the outlier removed. We come to these very different conclusions. Looking in, zooming in on that influential data point, we've, generated the following hypotheses that might explain why there is such a different pattern being exhibited by this one case in the data set. And, by and large, really getting at the truth of it is going to involve more data collection.
I just want to defend myself for a second. I at least did not change the raw data. It stayed the same. I loaded it in, new name, and that's the one
new variable. It's changing another variable, don't worry.
Yeah.